Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Revolution CD2 Progressive Forum. My name is Andy Sellis. I am the Secretary of our Revolution Southern Oregon. We're delighted to host this forum, giving you an opportunity to hear each of the 7 candidates vying to be the Democratic candidate who, with our support and a good strategy, will retire Greg Walden in November. Just a year ago, I and several other Bernie-crats formed an affiliate of our Revolution here in Southern Oregon. Our Revolution is the successor organization to Sanders' presidential campaign. Affiliates around the country are united in supporting Bernie's platform issues and a true populist, progressive vision for our country. While our opposition to the Trump agenda goes without saying, we also reject the destructive neocon and neoliberal policies of past Republican and Democrat institutions. Bernie showed us that an individual with a $27 donation, a cell phone, and a voluntary spirit can shake up the corrupt, corporatized system that has plagued us even before the disastrous 2010 Citizens United decision. Our local affiliate numbers about 200 people. If you haven't joined us yet, please sign up on one of the clipboards in the back of the room to receive information. Now, before I introduce our moderator and the candidates introduce themselves, I want you to meet our officers. Sarah Spansale, please stand up. Sarah Spansale, our president. Colette Perry Miller. Our vice president, Lori Hoagland. Our treasurer, Lori Hoagland, yes. And I have to tell you that these 3 ladies are passionate Bernie-crats and the most committed and tenacious individuals I've ever had the pleasure to work with. I also want to give a shout out to our tolerant spouses, partners, and children who have had to endure our relentless focus on all things Bernie. Please clap for them. We are fortunate in Southern Oregon to have a number of local organizations with whom we sometimes partner, including Healthcare for All Oregon, Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, Unite Oregon, Peace House, Jobs with Justice, and most recently the Rogue Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship Social Justice and Action Committee. We look forward to more collaboration with these and other organizers going forward. On a personal note, I celebrate the number of organizations that are being run by a new generation of young, bright, energetic women. Women, for example, like Michelle Glass and Hannah Sewell of Rogue Action Center and Rogue Climate, and our own Sarah Spansale and Colette Perry Miller. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce one such dedicated activist to you as health equity organizer at Unite Oregon. She has been working in social justice related to healthcare for about a decade. She began as an intern at Planned Parenthood and stayed on through the 2008 election. That experience only solidified her commitment in working to fight inequality and racism through organizing and citizen engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce our moderator for tonight's forum, Rebecca Pearson.
Hi, everyone. All right. So at this time, I'm going to give you all some guidelines, just some housekeeping. We're going to ask everyone to please silence cell phones and other electronics. We're also encouraging folks, pictures, tweets, recordings, or live streams totally allowed. Please be respectful of your neighbors, though, as you do that. We are using the hashtag OurRevCD2. It's up there. It's what's going to be associated with this event. So thank you for using that if you do post. In keeping with our intention to respect everyone and stay within our allotted time, we request that the audience refrain from interruptions of any kind during this forum, including but not limited to questions, statements, or applause until closing statements are given by the candidates. We're not able to include every question submitted by the public today, but we will send every single question to the candidates, and we will record any of the responses that we receive, and they'll be shared on our Facebook page, so be on the lookout for that. And right now I'm going to ask the candidates to come take their seats. I have some guidelines for you all as well. Wonderful. Everyone, this is, all the progressive candidates for Congressional District 2. So candidates, when one of you begins your role in Congress, you'll have to follow some strict rules about the length of time allotted for your statements on the floor of the House. With this in mind, we're giving you all a great opportunity to practice these skills in communication with concise, clear statements, and we request that you respect the timekeeper sitting up here. I will cut you off if you go beyond your allotted time, so please do not test me on this. All right. No. I've got a big hook. All right, so we're going to start with introductions. You all have 2 minutes each, and we're going to start with Jamie McLeod-Skinner.
Well, thank you all for being here. This is really what democracy looks like, and thank you to our organizers as well. My name is Jamie McLeod-Skinner. I finished high school just down the road from here, and went off to school studying engineering and planning, and went on to commit myself to a life of public service. But what really drove that decision was something that impacted me early on. I was born in Wisconsin. My mom is a teacher, a retired teacher now, and she was a single mom with 2 kids in a small town in Wisconsin way back when. And she would get up early to drive a school bus. She would work all day as a teacher. She drove a school bus on the way home. And during the summers, she would pick apples with migrant workers to put food on the table for her kids. And there were times that I recall her saying she wasn't hungry at dinner time. And that was, looking back as an adult, realizing that it was because there was just enough food for 2 people, and there were 3 people in the household. And I don't often tell, it's a personal story that I don't often tell. I usually talk about my experience as a water expert, my 8 years in elected office, my running and winning elections. But I think what's really key when I look at a lot of the questions that are before us here tonight, it's really about our core and our focus and what has shaped us. And I was profoundly shaped by my mom, who's my greatest role model, and the sacrifices that she made for our family and the role modeling that she did for us. So when I finished my degrees in engineering and planning, instead of going into the private sector, I went over to Bosnia to run a reconstruction program after the war. That's the kind of dedication I've committed my life to, and that's what I believe. I believe profoundly in public service, and that's why I want to serve you in Congress. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie. We're going to move on to Jim Curry next. 2 minutes.
My name is Jim Curry. First of all, I want to say this is an incredible crowd. I ran in 2016, and when I was running, if I ever had 25 people in a room, it was like over the top exciting. Here we are 10 months before the general election, and look at it. And this is not only unique to Medford, it was in Ashland, it was in Sun River, everywhere. So this is indicative of why we are going to repeal and replace Greg Walden in 2016 or 2018. So thank you. I'm originally from North Dakota, graduated from high school, went to college for a year. I enlisted in the Army for 2 years. I got out of the Army at Fort Lewis up in Washington. I went to school at Pacific Lutheran University, graduated with a business degree, took a year off, went to law school in San Diego, went up to Alaska when I was in law school on an internship program. After I graduated from law school, I went back to North Dakota for a couple of years. I worked for a small law firm for a year. I taught at the University of North Dakota for a year, filling in for a guy that took a sabbatical. Moved back to Alaska and I was up there for 24 years. First 14 years, I was with the municipality of Anchorage. I was a prosecutor, I did some insurance defense, and then I started to do contracts and procurement. In '97, I went with BP, the oil and gas company, and I'll talk more about that later. But so I was with BP, I did contracts. I was not in the legal department. I worked over in Algeria for 5 years, and then I retired from BP in December of 2013. I'm married, I have 4 children. 2 of my daughters teach at Kids Unlimited here in Medford. My youngest daughter is a junior up at the University of Oregon. And so my son is working, trying to get thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
We're going to move on to Michael Byrne.
Trump is going to get us killed. Greg Walden is his chief enabler. Hi, my name is Mike Byrne. I'm a stonemason. I'm the working class candidate. For 50 years, I've worked in this district, raising a family, worked in the woods, on the farms and ranches, and up on the mountain. To get the whole story, though, you're going to have to go to my website, congressmanbyrne.com. There's actually a 51-minute long video, unedited. You'll learn everything you need to know about me. That's quite an investment, as Peter Sage suggested, but I know it's worth it. That was done several months ago, but I haven't changed. Are you tired of the bad news? I mean, come on, as a candidate, I need to know this stuff, so I'm staying up with it. Wife beaters. Scott Pruitt is now saying he quit denying climate change. Now he says global warming is good. Can you all hear me back there? But hey, there's some good news, and I want to share this with you. Mike Pence left Korea without starting a nuclear war. There's a lot, no, think about it. The Olympics, when everybody lays down their weapons, it's the most peaceful time of the year. I was a professional skier. I skied with kids that have competed in the Olympics. I know what they're up against. Okay, and then Steve Bannon, he says 10,000 years of patriarchy are over. Let's hear it. Oh, no, can't do that. Well, anyway, now is the time. You know what the time? It's time for our revolution. Our revolution. We're going to go door to door. We're going to talk to people. We've got what money won't buy. Time. And the time is ours.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, we're going to move on to Dr. Jenny Nearing.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jenny Nearing, and I don't usually introduce myself as doctor, but it is why I'm here, so it's really important. I've been a physician for almost 3 decades now, and I have spent my career as a physician advocating and working for the, sorry, I'm not sure why somebody's gesturing. But, okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. I have spent my career working and advocating for the health and well-being of Oregonians from all walks of life, and that's what I want to do in Congress. I was 5 years old when I decided to be a doctor, and I love being a doctor. It is the best job, and I've never thought that there was something else that I wanted to do. But working in our broken healthcare system, I found in this last 6 to 12 months, as we saw the things that we've been working for in healthcare going away, the ability to live well and to live healthy, to be able to get over your illness and go home and actually live independently, be able to get back to work and get a living wage that you can actually afford to pay your rent with. All of these things are going away in this last year. All of them are being threatened. And I found that in this last year, I would go to work and come home and say, I did some good work today. I helped make a difference in someone's life. And it just wasn't enough anymore. My daughter told me when she was in middle school that, yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, Mom, but you're a doctor and I know you help people and that's great, but I need to change the world. And that has been a little thorn in my side for years because I'm pretty competitive and I don't like my daughter beating me at anything. And this is my chance. It feels like a magic, perfect time. This is a time for me to make the difference and to change the world. And that's what I'm going to do for you by getting into Congress and making the changes we need so that we can live well and healthy. And I promise to be your advocate there.
Thank you, Jenny. All right, we're going to move on to Roz Mason.
It's good to be with you today. Friends, we are in a very pivotal time in our society. We're facing some interconnected challenges like the economy, the digital age, technology, and perhaps most pressingly, climate change. We have a window to respond to this. There is an urgency. Too many people are responding to the necessary and natural anxiety in a way that doesn't uphold our best values. The anxiety is natural. We're evolved primates, so of course we're going to be anxious, but I'm hoping that instead of the low road of divisiveness and enmity, we can choose together to lift up the high road, which is creativity, courage, and extending dignity to all people. The goal before us is to beat Greg Walden. And part of what that entails is reaching out to the rural people who have voted for him again and again. And when we do that, we need to do it in a way that extends dignity. And I think that that's something I can offer. My life has been spent in a variety of ways, engaging with people who seem, at first blush, very different from me. I'm a former long-haul truck driver. I am a former science teacher who understands climate change. I have a sharp mind and a mathematics degree. I work as a hospital chaplain, and I serve people who are in their last days. I can stay calm. I have a master's degree from Harvard. I can rub shoulders with the powerful and know I owe them nothing except human dignity. We can do this.
Thank you, Roz. We're going to move on to Eric Burnett.
The very first thing I want to say is thank you very much to our Revolution for pulling this together. This is a huge amount of work, and look how crowded this room is. This is wonderful. This is really good. This is what it's going to take to find a new line of work for Greg Walden, and that's why we're here. Okay, I'm Eric Burnett. I live in Hood River. I live about 2 blocks from Greg Walden. I've known him since 1991. Even voted for him once back when he was that sort of rational, moderate guy who would go for a hike with Earl Blumenauer around the mountain, come up with a reasonable forest practice as a compromise. He's not that guy anymore. Those days are over. He's not that guy anymore. A little bit about my background. I'm a Maritime Academy graduate. I worked as a ship's officer for a number of years. I came ashore. I worked basically as the person under the governor's office at the Port of Portland in charge of deep draft vessel infrastructure. What does that mean? It means if you grew a ton of wheat anywhere in eastern Oregon or Washington or Montana or the Dakotas and you shipped it to Asia, it went out through at least one of my infrastructure projects. So I've been in the agricultural industry either moving stuff on the water or making sure that it can move on the water for pretty much all of my commercial life. Why did I get into the race? I took an early retirement from the executive director position at the Oregon Board of Maritime Pilots. We did the licensing for the pilots. And I ended up walking past Greg Walden's house time and time again while he was writing the fat and failed Obamacare repeal language. His right front tire was halfway flat week after week after week. He couldn't be bothered to come home and drive his own truck, talk with his constituents as he was doing a huge amount of damage. At that moment, his right to serve in office was forfeit. That's why I'm running.
Thank you, Eric. We're going to move on and hear from Tim White.
Good afternoon, and thanks everybody for showing up. My name is Tim White, and I want to be your congressman from the 2nd District. I live in Bend, but I'm originally from Indiana. I went to school at Indiana, where I have a degree in economics and an MBA with a concentration in finance. After school, I went to work for the Chrysler Corporation in 1980, the first time they were trying to go broke. As you listen to us tonight, you're going to find up here we have more in common than we have difference. So the real question is, who is electable? As a retired finance guy, I can't give you the clever marketing campaigns. I have friends in marketing. I'd have to call in to do that. But the real question I want to talk about is what political pundits say. You need 3 things to win an election. You need to have money, you need to have a ground game, and you need to have a message. Well, Clinton outspent Trump 2-1. She had a ground game that dwarfed anything Trump put together. All Trump had was a message that resonated across the country, and you know how that story came out. I believe we have to come up with a message that will resonate. To do that, I met with 80 union carpenters Thursday night. And when I walked in, I could tell it was a Republican crowd. I said, hey, we got any Republicans in here? And about 80% of the hands went up. And I said, okay. So I did my 10-minute pitch, and then I said, I came here to hear you tonight. I've heard me talk enough. What are your issues? The issues were jobs. They didn't talk about guns. They didn't talk about abortion. They didn't talk about the environment. They talked about jobs. And they said, this thing you're talking about with the highways, will it really bring back jobs? What are the jobs? Where are they? Their concern is for immigrants, because the immigrants are moving into skilled trades. Again, they're worried about losing their jobs. We need to co-opt the Republicans, because if we only campaign on Democratic platforms, I guarantee you we will lose this election in November.
All right. Thank you all for your wonderful. We're going to move on to our first question, and all of you are going to have a chance to respond to this. The question is, what are your views on campaign finance, and what are the campaign strategies you will use to beat Walden, since he will likely outspend any challenger, regardless of their fundraising tactics? And the first person we're going to ask to answer this question is Mike Byrne.
I'm going to write a book when this is all over called Candidate School. And the first person I met when I decided I was going to run for Congress said, Mike, you're going to have to form a political action committee and you're going to have to start raising money. So think about it. District 2 is bigger than the state of Florida. Just to drive around, just to come down here with my wife, I mean, it's $500. The basic, let's not talk about the millions that Walden has. He, in fact, 10 million, 20 million, he is going to have whatever it takes. So let's not talk about money. Let's talk about what it's going to take. It's going to take people knocking on doors. End of story. That's going to take some money, but it's not going to take millions. Okay, so what am I going to do about it? I'm going to ask, if your candidate has not already asked you to knock on doors and make phone calls, I am, and I have a sign-up sheet over there. And I'll have a walk list and a map for you tomorrow. We need to do this kind of work. Money is not going to win this election. There's a lot of countries that have, well, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. You don't agree with me? He doesn't agree with me. Some countries have a shortened campaign season. Some have caps on expenditures. Some have public financing. Those are all good ideas. What we need to do is talk to people. That is the revolution. It's the only way we're going to win this election. If your candidate hasn't asked you to knock on doors yet, I have. Sign-up sheets over there. We'll have a list for you tomorrow. Thank you.
All right. Same question to Jim Crary.
Campaign finance reform is the reason I got into this race, and it's my #1 issue. If you could pick an unsexy primary issue, campaign finance reform would be it. But you know what? Campaign finance reform is something that actually deals with the system. Healthcare, climate change, those are issues that don't deal with the system. So I want to make a systemic change, not just address, and I want to address the other issues, don't get me wrong, but I want to make the change. Who thinks in this room that the way we finance our campaigns today is something that's really beneficial to you? Right. Nobody. Except, I guess I don't see the Koch brothers in here. Otherwise, they would have stood up and said yes. So what's my answer to campaign finance reform? It's right out of Bernie Sanders' book. He raised $227 million in individual donations. He showed that the way I want to do it and the way I am doing it is a viable way to finance a campaign. I am not only talking the talk, I am walking the walk. I am taking money only from individuals, no corporations, no unions, although I totally support unions, and I would love to be endorsed by unions, and I would welcome contributions from individual union members. But you know what? The only way we're going to change it is by actually doing it. When we get elected, or when I get elected and I go to DC, and I've shown that you can get elected by only taking individual donations, other people will do the same thing. My answer is public financing of elections. I would like to see everybody have $50, and the only thing you could do with that would be to contribute to an issue or a candidate that you could vote for. We have about 500,000 registered voters in District 2. That would mean $25 million from non-special interests. Can you imagine? People would be coming back not only for your vote, but also for your contribution. Thanks.
All right, we're going to move on to Jenny Nearing.
At this point, we know that we've got a lot of money up against us with Greg Walden, but we also know that we need to get that ground game out there, but we also need some money to do that. Bernie managed to raise over $200 million, and he needed that to help make that ground game happen. I am lucky enough to have as my campaign manager someone who spent all of 2016 mobilizing that ground game, getting that vote out, and getting that people to work, getting those people out there voting that we need. I know that we can do this. It is going to take some money, and I have the ability, because healthcare is finally at the top of everyone's list, to bring money into this district from people who care about healthcare. People know that people who are in healthcare, who've been dealing with it day in and day out, are going to be able to help make these changes happen. And they care. And they're not looking for influence, they're looking for change. And I'll be able to tap into that money from physicians and healthcare workers around the country who are going to help us get Greg Walden, who tried to repeal our first advances in healthcare, out of there so we can actually make some real changes.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Roz Mason.
All right, so I'm hearing some great things from the other candidates. Thank you. I'm going to go big picture. This is about money and what money means in our society. For too long, money has become a short-term way of thinking that it's security and salvation. What I'm hopeful for is that something miraculous will happen following the hard work and the relationship building, which really is fundamental to our paradigm shift. And I say our, I really mean the people in this room. We understand that this is a relational enterprise that puts, again, human dignity at the forefront. Imagine, if you will, lots and lots and lots of money flowing into this race to try to beat whoever is the Democratic candidate. So much money, in fact, that the don't fence me in people of rural Oregon finally say, wait a minute, I'm for the little people. Maybe that's who I should be listening to. Maybe that's where I should be getting my information and my news. I don't know how long it's going to take. We may be able to pull it off this year. It doesn't matter. We need to keep doing what we're doing. And there is a lot of good thinking here. You all have a lot of good thinking. There's excitement. But it's going to take us continuing to show up, give where we can. And I think what's eventually going to win folks over is then when they see people and meet them who are speaking with integrity and genuinely concerned about one another.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Eric Burnett.
In the first place, I think what we're looking at for this election cycle, the things that we can affect for this election cycle, are not going to be related to finance. Whoever wins this race is going to be severely outspent by Greg Walden. We know that. We don't need to raise one more dollar than him. We just need to get one more vote. Now, that said, I'm going to move on to strategy here. Red rural America already has a Republican Party. They appear to like it. And if we want them to do something different, we have to offer them something different. We will not win by being Republicans light. We need to offer something different, something better, and something progressive. And we need to differentiate ourselves, and we need to make that message come clear again and again and again. We're not going to win by being Republicans light. It's the strategy question that we can impact in this race. The finance question, yes, absolutely, we need public campaign financing. That's not going to happen in 2018. We can change the strategy, and that's what this is about.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Tim White.
Well, as we all know, Mr. Walden got about 95% of his money from outside the district, mostly outside of the state. He will continue to do that. He's already raised about $4 million this election. and he will. My guess is it'll be about 6 million, which is about $1.5 million more than he got last time. Are we going to be able to easily take money out of politics? No. And I'm sorry, I know people aren't going to like that answer, but the PAC industry is a $100 billion a year industry. If you think they're just going to walk away from this, you are mistaken. That's the problem with being a retired finance guy. You can't get away from facts and figures. Another one, we talk about the healthcare. Obviously, healthcare is a big issue in this, but 17 of the 20 counties of a district that 130,000 people got their insurance by virtue of Medicaid subsidies. And 17 of the 20 counties turned it down. These would have been the first people. So our issue is going to be how to get these people to address a message, or how to give them a message that they will feel we are in their corner to support. Right now, they don't think there's a difference they don't think Walden's doing anything for them, but they don't see a Democrat standing up and doing anything better for them. So they're just going to, why change the horse in midstream? He's been there all along, they will continue. We have to figure out how to get a message. As much as I would like to get the money out of campaigns, and on my flyer it says, hey, $5,000 per person, no PACs, no corporations, only comes from registered voters. Yes, I believe that. But the problem is, folks, this is a multi-$100 billion industry that's not going quietly into the night. We're going to have to come up with another way to attack this.
Thank you so much. And finally, Jamie McLeod-Skinner.
Thanks. So we don't have to outraise Greg Walden. We just have to get, as was said, another vote, and one extra vote than he does. And so it's going to come down to working really hard, and that's where the upsurge and all the energy that we've seen around our district is going to be critically important. Around campaign finance, yes, we need campaign finance reform. When I served on city council, here's what we did about it. We recognized the fact that the Supreme Court had set some boundaries and limited some of the things that we could do. So we looked at why people raise money. They raise it to get the word out. And so we created an incentive program so that people could raise additional resources if they opted into the program. It was a voluntary program that people agreed to cap the amount of money they raised and limit what they did to that capped amount of money. It also created an incentive in providing additional ways for candidates to get the word out. So we can create an incentive program that does a couple things. Shifts the focus from just raising money to helping people get the word out. It also sets a standard for all candidates. Do you opt in or do you opt out? There's tremendous pressure that would then be on candidates to opt in, because the question is, do you believe in campaign finance reform and restrictions? Do you believe in the integrity of the process over just raising money? In setting up that kind of frame, candidates inevitably opted into it, because if you didn't, if they raise question about your focus on money versus voters. And so that's the kind of carrot type program we can work within the current structure and the current Citizens United framework that the Supreme Court has established. What I'd also like to see is this Congress pass legislation that would set the stage for legislation to go through and have the Supreme Court relook at and hopefully overturn Citizens United.
Thank you so much for those answers. We're going to move on. The next question you will all answer as well, and you have 2 minutes. The question is, tell us about an experience or time in your life that helped you empathize with vulnerable populations, and then what did you do? And we're going to start with Mike Byrne.
We were given these questions in advance, so you'd think I'd have a really tight story that lasted 1 minute and 59 seconds. My problem is, I've lived my whole life like this. So which example am I going to try to pull out? Well, I'll try this, because if you didn't cry about this experience, it really wasn't that important. So I was a Special Olympics coach for at least 10 years, and I did it 2 different times. You're all familiar with Special Olympics, so I taught kids how to ski and snowboard. And when I first got into it, I used to run the race department up at Mount Hood Meadows, and we hosted the state Special Olympics. And I'd had no experience with it, but seeing this go on, and these kids, the way they treated each other, and I'm talking about the way the kids treated each other, it was amazing. I was moved, and so I signed up. I'm going to start coaching. So for the next 10 years, I worked with kids, teaching them to ski and snowboard, and these are kids that couldn't make it out there. But when they were on the slopes, they were free, because skiing, I created these just drills where you create muscle memory. You do something over and over. And I taught these kids, they could ski, they could fly down the mountain. It was unbelievable. They were so happy. And we went into the lodge. You guys all ski, a big number of you, right? You go on, no? What have you been doing your whole life? So you go into the lodge, it's all crowded with regular people. And these kids, they'd get right together and they would huddle up and they were supportive of each other. And they felt like, oh no, you know. But they'd get back, come on, let's go skiing. We get back out on the hill and it was amazing. I'd like to tell you about my experiences as a CASA, a whole different area with emotionally disturbed kids. It's on my website, congressmanbyrne.com.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Jenny Nearing. Same question, 2 minutes.
Yeah. So this is a pretty hard one for me because it's pretty much every day of my job. But one day that kind of stood out when I was reviewing the question was the day where I realized I had 4 patients that I had seen that day in the hospital who had all were either actively homeless or had been homeless within the last year. Of those 4, 2 of them had schizophrenia and had not been able to access the mental health and the medications that they needed to keep their life organized and to be able to sign a contract and pay their rent on time, and they had been living on the streets and under bridges. The 3rd person had actually won the lottery about 5 years earlier and had plenty of money to afford a place to live, but he'd been taken advantage of by many of his friends and become so depressed that he was drinking and living under the bridge. The 4th person might have been the saddest, although all of these were hard to see. The 4th one was a 71-year-old woman who had lost her husband when he was 60, and with the health issues that he had and their low-income jobs that they had worked hard at all their lives, his illness had made them lose most of their money that they had saved for retirement. And she found herself unable to afford a place to live, and a year earlier had moved in with her daughter. Her daughter was around 40, and her daughter lost her job, and they had spent the last year living out of her car. And she was admitted to the hospital incredibly malnourished and dehydrated, in pain from arthritis that she couldn't get help from or medications for. And the day that she was admitted, she had finally gotten her housing approval to be able to get some affordable housing. What I saw from that day was that the cases that we see all the time, 1 or 2 at a time, all in one day, made me realize that this is not going to be a unique problem. This is a growing problem, and especially for our seniors who don't have adequate retirement savings. And that made me create a new nonprofit that, if I get a chance, I'll talk about later.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Roz Mason.
Well, I was working at a domestic violence shelter, and one of my coworkers was Native American, and she was helping to organize an event for elders and youth up near Mount Hood at a camp to look at some of the issues. And she said, "Hey, y'all come." So I went, and it was a really privileged opportunity for me to just volunteer. We dug toilets. I cooked and washed the dishes and looked after the kids, and got to see what to me was a very different way of organizing a community. There was no particular leader, but folks showed up and did what needed to be done. When it was mealtime, the kids would come to the front of the line, get their food, and take that food back to feed their grandmas and grandpas. I met people who had been at Wounded Knee in the 70s. I heard about what was happening at Big Mountain with the forced relocation of Navajo folks, taking away their sheep, all in service of Peabody Coal. And I began to understand and feel and see the pain of these people that I came to love very deeply. This is, for them, it's the same old story. So it really touched me, and it alerted me to the fact that there are institutional forms of oppression that some people fight every day. So I'm still working on that journey of being an ally. But that's why relationships matter. And so when I think about why I stand up and do things, a lot of the times it's because I'm thinking of someone I knew from a particular cohort or group, and I'm doing it because I love that person and they inspired me, and I want to honor our connection. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Eric Burnett.
So if you've ever been involved in any like heavy infrastructure work or construction, you got to get big pieces of machinery to and from odd and uncomfortable places. And if you're doing it on the river, it normally involves putting big pieces of machinery onto barges and moving them where they need to go. One of the things that I had to do when I was working in grain export infrastructure was make sure that we can make all that happen. A big marshalling area along the Columbia River. It was about 150 acres, and we were just about to get ready to use it again, and somebody said, well, we got to get the police to go do a sweep. I said, why, what? And I said, well, we got some people living rough out there. I said, well, let me go out there first and just walk around and just see what I can find, and I can warn people to stay out of the way. And the police department said, yeah, that's fine. If you can do that, that'd be great. So I did that, and I ended up meeting a bunch of folks who were living rough, and there was something about them. It's like, I'm a Maritime Academy guy, and it's like, these guys are some of these folks are military. Some of the women were military, ex-military. And I started talking with them, and I said, so you guys are all living rough out here. Stay off to that corner, if you would, and we're going to be using this area. The police know you're here. No one's going to bother you. And I went, thank you for the heads up. And I said, so do you guys get VA benefits? They said, oh, no, we don't. Why? We got a less than honorable discharge. A lot of these folks had been wounded. They didn't get medical benefits at all. They didn't get them because they had a less than honorable discharge, almost in every case due to PTSD. So my point of empathy there, for Pete's sake, is if you put your hand up and swear into the armed forces, you get the medical benefit, period, regardless of your discharge status. I want to ask Greg Walden that question. He's a champion of the vets. Greg, why aren't they getting medical benefits?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Many moons ago, when I was working back at Chrysler, my boss called me up. I was in engineering finance at the time. And he said, I need a volunteer. Go get me a volunteer. That's why we used to do things back then. So I said, well, what do we need? He said, well, it's called Project Business. We volunteered so many of the managers to go teach in inner city schools downtown Detroit. So I went back down and came back about 10 minutes later and said, I got a volunteer. And he said, who? And I said, me. And Rod looked at me and said, not on your life. I said, why? It's a half day a week. You'll get over. I'll be back. I'll be back by 1 o'clock. You can work me all night. So I started teaching 7th and 8th grade girls in downtown Detroit about basic economics. These kids came from probably the worst homes you could imagine, broken homes, single mothers, etc. And they had really never had a role model, somebody that actually showed up once a week and told them how the world really worked. I used to always use McDonald's as my example about, hey, when the guy makes the hamburger and they sell it for 68 cents and they drop it on the floor, how much money did they just lose? And, we'd have all sorts of economic examples like this. And this went on for 3 months. It got to the point that when I would drive in the morning, I would come up the back of the school. It was a Catholic girls' school, and they'd all be at the windows like, hi, Mr. White, So it was really cool to be able to think that you were having perhaps one of the first positive impressions on these kids that they'd ever seen. And at the end of the season, or at the end of the semester, they gave me a card. And when I opened it up, they'd all chipped in to buy Mr. White a Big Mac meal. And it was really hard to be a grown man and to hide your eyes. But I think today that those kids are all grown up, and maybe just 1 or 2 of them went on to do something else because I was willing to spend a half day a week.
Thank you so much. Jamie McLeod Skinner.
Well, I mentioned my mom earlier in my introductory remarks, who was my greatest role model. And when I was 9, this is the mid-'70s, she took a teaching job in Tanzania and taught at a government school there where I went to school. It was during the time of Idi Amin, for those of you who remember, and many of my classmates were refugees from Uganda. And hearing their stories, I remember their stories to this day, and it made a couple impressions on me. One is that being in leadership role is a sacred trust with your constituents. and the other is the incredible courage and passion for survival that people have who are refugees. And it impacted me greatly. And when I went on, after working in Bosnia and Kosovo, I wanted to come back to the States, and the International Rescue Committee, the organization I was with, asked me to run their refugee resettlement office in the Bay Area in San Jose. And I was delighted to do that because it felt like going back and serving people that, serving folks that were very similar to kids that I had grown up with. The other thing that I think that makes it relevant for our district is in the past 7 months when I've been traveling out to all 20 counties in our district, spending full time, really reaching out and connecting with folks throughout our district. There are levels of poverty in our district that are similar to and comparable to refugees I work with. There's issues that we're facing, things like the opioid crisis that we're facing, 1 in 4 Oregonians. And the Klamath Herald News is very kind to recently publish an op-ed piece they did in the opioid crisis. There are all sorts of issues in our community that we need to address and we need to focus on. And we need that level of understanding from a visceral level in Washington, D.C. on folks who are making decisions about it. These are not theoretical things. These are things that impact people's lives and families. And we need to be passionate about serving them and caring for them. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Jim Crary.
When I was a prosecutor up in Anchorage, just about everything I did was alcohol related. We had a victim witness coordinator that would deal with victims of domestic violence to make sure that they would be there to testify. I can't tell you how many times I did drunk driving cases. I went into one sentencing, and the person that got hit by the drunk driver came in with a cane, and the other person came in walking just fine. And I remember thinking, the person that got hit got life, and this person got 3 days. That was a drunk driver. So when something really irritates me, and alcohol abuse really irritates me, I drink, and I have no problem with someone drinking, but when it turns into abuse, that bothers me a whole lot. You can either sit back and complain about it, or you can step up and try to do something about it, which is why I'm running for Congress. But in that case, what I did is I did a local initiative up in Anchorage, and it would have put a 6% sales tax on alcohol. It would have raised $6 million. And what was driving me was that I knew that with this $6 million, some police officer would be hired, and one night that police officer that got hired because of this extra money would make a drunk driving arrest, and because that arrest was made, somebody's life would be saved. No one would ever know that, because how do you know your life has been saved unless you had the accident? So that's what drove me. And the alcohol industry came in from the outside, and they outspent me 5-1. And I came within 0.5% of getting an alcohol tax passed. So it was a real challenge, but it was something that was totally worthwhile because I knew what the benefits would have been if that had been passed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next question, which we're going to ask you all to answer. You'll have 2 minutes to answer this question. Tell us about a time in your life when you took an unpopular stance for something you deeply believe in. And we're going to start with Jenny Nearing.
So in my practice before when I first practiced, I was in nephrology, so I was a kidney doctor. And I started my own practice, and we grew fairly fast. And we had about, I think at that time, 5 people in the practice. And we were having a partner meeting, and one of the partners said, you know, I found out that we can go ahead and go to this 3-day course, and we can learn how to do ultrasounds of kidneys ourselves, and we could buy a machine and do it here in the office for our patients. And I said, all right, but we live in an urban area where if you need an ultrasound, how long does it usually take you for your patient to get it? They're like, oh, you know, a day or 2 at most. And I said, okay, if we send them for an ultrasound, the person who's doing the ultrasound is going to be a tech who probably trained at OIT and who's been training for a long time to make sure they get the best pictures possible. And then it's going to be looked at by a radiologist who spent 4 years of training to make sure they weren't going to miss anything. So do you really think that if you go to a 3-day course, you're going to be able to take those pictures yourself and read them with the accuracy of the people that we can send them to here in town? And if you can tell me that you'd be happy to have me read that and do that ultrasound, just as happy as having us go to these experts who are already in town, then we can buy that machine. We didn't talk about it again after that. So I know that standing on my ethics has never been really popular when it means that somebody is not making money, but that's what we need in Congress right now, because the only way we're going to fix these problems, like our broken healthcare system and affordable housing, are to make unpopular choices with some people where somebody's going to make less money.
Thank you so much. Roz Mason.
If you recall back to my list of things I mentioned about my background, you might have gotten the idea that I'm a little bit of an odd duck. And that's been the case throughout my life. And for whatever reason, I have an instinct for fairness and speaking truth. And I will end up with my foot in my mouth more than I wish were the case. I'm going to tell you 2 quick stories because I think they're going to go fast. One is that I know a woman who's in education on the East Coast, and this past summer when there was a lot of discussion around Black Lives Matter, I thought my other educators in the school district where I worked might want to know about this because I was learning a great deal. And my understanding was that educators, to get a license renewal, you have to take a class on supporting civil liberties. And I think in my schooling, I've encountered that we have an obligation to serve all students. And so I sent out an email saying there's this woman, she's got this Facebook page and Twitter, and if you've been watching what's been happening with Black Lives Matter and you're wondering what's next or how you might get involved, here's somebody who's a resource person. And the response from the district, well, from one person who was well regarded, was to say there are 2 sides to every story. There are certainly 2 sides to this. She read it as being against the police, as though that meant if I supported Black Lives Matter that I was against the police, which is far from the case. I used to work in domestic violence, and they would take us from danger to safety. So it's a complex issue, but my takeaway from that is that sometimes we're going to stumble and fall when we're trying to do the right thing, and we need to stand up and keep doing it anyway and get smarter the next time.
Thank you so much. Eric Burnett.
It is not at all unlikely that one of us here a year from now may be voting on impeachment. It's worth thinking about. Okay. I looked back at what happened with Bill Clinton, and I thought, you know, if I was sitting in the House, would I have voted to impeach? I would have. He didn't tell the truth. He was being investigated, and it was something that directly involved his presidency. So, and that did not earn me a lot of friends in certain quarters. That probably isn't going to surprise anybody. But I do believe you actually have to tell the darn truth if you're being investigated, and it involves an office that you hold. Now, think of the repercussions of that. Had he actually, and he did survive his trial in the Senate. The next thing I thought was, for Pete's sake, the morning after, Al Gore should have walked into that office and said, hey, Bill, we're going to have a half-hour meeting, and at the end of it, one of the 2 of us is going to resign, and you get to pick which. Had that happened, I'm convinced that Al Gore either would have been the president because he was an incumbent, or would have had enough of a moral distance from Bill Clinton to have won that election. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much.
I'm gonna move over to Tim White.
Well, it wasn't so much as unpopular, but it pretty much almost got me fired after about 8 years of my career. I don't know how much you folks know about automotive assembly, but it's dangerous, it's hard. These people go in, they spend 10 hours on the line. I had some positions in my career where I could make a difference for these people. Anybody know what a leaf spring is? Okay. Well, over in Windsor Assembly, we used to make what we call B van wagons. They were the old-fashioned, great big ones. And I was in the plant watching this guy carrying these 40 to 80-pound leaf springs and having to walk about 40 feet and then try to hold it in one position while we put a pin in. And I said, what's the accident rate in here? Well, it's the worst place in the plant. And so I said, well, is there anything we can do? And he said, yeah, we could get these carousels so the guy can at least stand here and it could lift it up to the van wagon as it comes along. And it was about $400,000. So I took it to my corporate controller and I said, we really need to do this. We're having a lot of accidents in the plant. It's really tough work. And Jim just hated spending money on this. This is a waste of money. And I made an unpopular comment for a young guy. Well, maybe if you had to stand there 10 damn hours a day and do it, you'd have a little different opinion. He signed the project, and as I walked out, his assistant came after me and said, "You're lucky you've still got a job, young man." I did this several times over my career. I talked in Klamath the other night about I'm a little bit different from somebody that came out of corporate America. I had a certain respect for these people that I believed paid my paycheck every month. And I still do. I'm not afraid to take the unpopular position and to stand up for the people that I don't think somebody else is standing up for them. That's why I'm doing this, because I want to stand up for rural America, because I don't think anybody's giving a damn about them at the moment.
Thank you so much. All right, Jamie McLeod Skinner.
Thank you. In looking at this question, I was thinking about, do I talk about being engaged in civil disobedience as a young adult because gay people are not allowed to march in the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York and some of the work I did there. Or I thought about fighting corporate welfare when I served on the Santa Clara City Council and the 49ers asked the city to build them a $1.2 billion publicly funded stadium. And I was the only one to say no and to push back on that and to help shape a much better deal for the city. But the thing I want to focus on is something that took place actually just down the road from us where we are now. What happened in the city of Phoenix. I believe fundamentally in integrity in government, in open government, in people who are elected to serve to make decisions about public resources. And about a year and a half ago, I think it is, I stepped in as the city manager. I was hired as the city manager, and I stepped in and began to address, I was the 8th they had in 7 years, and good theme, and stepped in to deal with some of the misappropriation of funds that were going on. I began to push back on decisions that were being made not in the public eye, and it became very clear to me that I was going to face the Sally Yates dilemma at the local level. And the question is, do I keep quiet, go along and protect myself, or do I speak out and push back and risk being fired? And it wasn't really a choice for me because I believe in integrity in government, and I believe that one's role, if you're in a leadership role, is to speak up and take the hits necessary to protect your constituents. And I did that, and I took the hits. And so the mayor targeted me, and then when he did and made it clear he wanted to kick me out, I actually asked for an open meeting so that I could air the issues within the city. That meant I got hit hard with he attacked on my personality issue, but I did that for the city so I could disclose the issues of the city so the city get cleaned up. And there's been 4 city managers there in the past year, by the way.
Thank you, Jamie. On to Jim Crary.
I keep going back to the same issue, campaign finance reform, and it's really not popular because it's totally unsexy. But again, I go back to it. Albert Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think everybody in here agreed that we have a lousy way to finance campaigns, but unless we change that, are we going to stay insane? And I think we are. I want to have people get elected that will actually represent us, their constituents, not their big dollar contributors. And so people come up to me all the time and say, oh, you're not a serious candidate because you're not taking money from anyone but individuals. And I say, you know what, I'm dead serious. I haven't gone 40,000 miles throughout Congressional District 2. I haven't been away from home for days on end. I haven't spent thousands of my own dollars because I'm not serious. I'm in it to win. But I'm not in it to win doing it the way it's always been done. Look at Bernie Sanders. Who the heck would have thought that guy had a chance against Hillary Clinton? Why are we talking about health care today? Because Bernie Sanders was talking about health care in 2016. Why am I talking about campaign finance reform? Same reason. He showed the way. He raised $227 million. It can be done. Everybody that says it can't be done, I beg to differ. I am not going to beat Greg Walden in November of 2018. But we are going to beat Greg Walden in 2018. And after I get elected and go to Congress, campaign finance reform is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're going to move on to Mike Byrne.
It was in a room similar to this at Sun River just a couple weeks ago. You guys were all there. So it was crowded, more crowded than this, smaller room. People sitting on the floors, lined up against the wall, and we got 10 minutes to talk there. Not just, so I was about the fourth or fifth one to go, so these folks have been sitting up against the wall for over half an hour. And when I came into the room, I said, before we get started, please, would some of you gentlemen give up your seat to one or more of these ladies that are been standing up against the wall for a half hour? Silence. All the men looked away. All the women glared at me. You know what? Here's the issue, and this is why I'm bringing up this particular situation. We're talking about winning in Oregon District 2. We're not talking about winning an election in Jackson County. We're talking about Eastern Oregon. We're talking about District 2. I'm here to tell you, in District 2, men give up their seats to women. It's not a sexist thing. A bodhisattva is going to give up his seat to anybody. So I made no friends in that crowd. It was complete silence. And I looked at everyone and said, you're kidding. Silence. But I'm here to tell you, that's what it's going to take to win in District 2. You might think I'm just a folksy candidate that's got stories. I'm not taking this serious. I'm taking it just as serious as my buddy Jim here. Come on, we need a candidate that can relate to District 2. You give up your chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much.